we've got some awesome designers here, and it's always interesting to get their take on things. Design's hugely important to the success of any software project, and I think we got 3 of the best mobile designers out there. So the first question I have for you guys, everyone's got a different process, and the discovery phase seems to be the most interesting one in design. And how do you go about it? I know that everyone has their own way of doing it. Not everyone does it the same way. So yeah, how do you start?
Just to introduce myself, I'm Joni Rustulka. I actually joined Nitobi earlier this year. I've been doing UX work for about 12 or 13 years now. So the focus, obviously, in the work at Nitobi is mobile. So it's been a bit of an exercise for me to get up to speed with what that looks like. So I'll talk a little bit about what my process is from a learning perspective, coming from more of a desktop, whether it be web or application design from there, and saying, okay, well, what do I do for mobile? I think what I see is that I follow many of the same research patterns that I do from a UX perspective, whether that be finding out, what are people using in terms of devices that we need to focus on. The first actual mobile site that I worked on was back in 2007, and what we did is looked at, what devices were currently accessing the website that we were building a mobile site for, to try and target some of the specifics to, if it was BlackBerry, what we were dealing with for the browser that we had, that we were dealing with. So looking at a lot of the statistics and that sort of thing. And then recently what I've been doing is looking at if we're doing an app, we're dealing with so many different sizes of screens if we're doing cross-platform. So trying to figure out what we can do with, if it's BlackBerry 6, which devices are running on there. So looking at not only the screens, but the inputs, whether it's with hard keys or if it's a lot of the soft key, that sort of thing. So that's looking at it from, what are we dealing with from a hardware and software perspective. And then obviously, we still do the same sort of work around talking to people about what they actually want from an app or a site. Like, it's got to be useful, whether it's for mobile or otherwise. So trying to get some more information about what people want, doing that kind of research where it's upfront research, asking questions, interviewing people, doing observations, to usability testing where possible. Usability testing, really tough right now to say that we have a great approach for mobile, but we're working on it, so.
Hi, I'm Dave Kaneda, creative director at Sencha. So I guess my general design process, I think I'm probably, from everyone up here, way less in the mobile design space. I do a lot more sort of branding, graphic design, that kind of thing. I'm a fake. But I've done a few apps, and but I come at it from that perspective. So my approach is much more sort of, what's the brand going to be? How's this going to match the brand? I try to sort of, in any project, try to sort of design within a vacuum for the first couple days maybe. Try to see sort of what I can come up with on my own, and then go into sort of what's the competition, what are like-minded apps doing, start to scope out everything in the field and get context, and then try to mesh the two together into something that sort of works. I guess overall, one of the bigger questions I try to answer up front is, how custom should this look? If it's a web app, how native should it be feeling to the platforms it's on? And sort of how custom versus native, it's my big thing.
I'm Brian Fling. I'm a creative director for PinchZoom up in Seattle, and a 10-year veteran mobile designer. So my first mobile design was, designing text on a WAP-based screen, if you can call that design. Yeah. It was actually, really, my job was how can I get that logo down to 100 pixels wide and still make it still look like a logo. So I've done just about every single process you can imagine, and pre-iPhone, I worked with a couple of mobile gaming companies. You'd usually use like the design document process, which is pretty popular with most game studios. which is kind of like a requirements document that merges creative with technical. I've tried a film production process. I've tried your traditional software design processes. Post iPhone, none of them really work. There's definitely, like what we've learned is, there's always this chicken and egg scenario where do you start with the technology or do you start with design? Sometimes designers are actually doing your data modeling and developers are actually, doing some design of how's this application going to flow. What we're experimenting with right now, I don't really have a solid answer. We're experimenting using the Marvel method, actually, which is Stanley's method, which is actually using the client, or in some cases myself, as being able to give notes about the beginning, middle, and end of like a story, and then having designers and developers simultaneously in kind of a sprint-based, 2-week sprint-based model. How do they start to craft their own kind of craft to that? So they still have the right narrative, but they still have freedom within that to kind of define what works for them. So it's definitely been a challenge, but doing sprints has definitely helped to kind of reduce our turnaround for iteration.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I don't think there's any set standard yet. We don't really know, so we're all sort of making it up as we go, which is interesting. And it kind of like moves into like a next question for me. When do you or where do you draw the line between a mobile site and a mobile app? And how do you decide that you should be doing a site versus an app? You can pass it on if you don't.
Yeah, no, I think...
I know David's got an answer like ready to go. No.
Do you have an answer?
That's a tough one.
It is a hard one.
Everything's an app.
Well, I mean, like I look at it from, if we look at, the regular metaphor, the idea with an app is that you're very task-based, you're very focused to a particular thing. I think that sort of translates into the mobile space as well. Apps that I find useful on my mobile device are things like converters. I need to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius, or things that are just really quick that I don't want to have to load up a website to do. I can do it in Google search, so sometimes I do it there, but it isn't to say that's why you have them. But I think one of the biggest things that I look at may be whether or not I need to use an app in, or if I need to use something in an offline sort of space. If I don't have access to the web, what can I do?
Okay, I guess the drawing line for me would be, we have web apps on the desktop that I think are pretty clear whether they're an app or not. You have like Facebook, you have Gmail, things like that, where you have keyboard shortcuts, you have everything is Ajax, they're single page apps, Twitter, the new Twitter.com. I think those are very clearly apps. And I think you can apply that same sort of mentality to the web. You have responsive design is really popular right now. I would say if that's what you're doing, if you're just shrinking the page width, if you're resizing images, that's a website. If you have a single page web app, that's obviously an app. And obviously there is a sort of gray ground in between. In regard to sort of deciding which one you're trying to do or which one you should be doing, I think a lot of times it does come down to just a matter of time, effort, energy, cost. It's pretty easy to throw in some media queries, get your page looking better across all devices, and that's a great thing. But at the same time, for a lot of sites, Wikipedia, I don't know, I could come up with a bunch more, but even blogs, having an actual app interface, having your site perform like the Twitter app performs would obviously be a nice thing. It wouldn't hurt your UX. It's just, it does take a little more time and cost. So that's for mine.
It's a good question, a hard one to answer. I'd say the kind of the fundamental difference between a site and an app is the URL and a link. So if you're using links and it's a portal onto the World Wide Web, then that's probably going to be a site, and users kind of expect site-like metaphor. Apps are very different, and so when users open up an app, they expect that information to be about them. It's personal, it's intimate. It's a very different experience, and while you can still have URLs there, that's not what they really expect. It's more of a trusted environment. One weird example is I was working with a customer that wanted to put like a sign-up form. They required a social security number to do it, and I was like, no one's ever going to fill out this form. Like they're going to wrap it in PhoneGap and everything. I was like, there's no one ever is going to put their social security number into this app because you're completely discounting the fact for the last 10 years we've always had this little lock icon in our browser that we know that helps us understand that this is secure. And then we can question whether that's actually secure or not, but at least we know it's there. Inside of if you remove the browser Chrome, you remove that security, you have to reinvent that metaphor. So that's kind of it's a simple example, but it's kind of a big question for users. So when we start to design those experiences, we have to make those type of considerations of what has the user done for the last 10 years and what are they doing now, and how are they going to use these platforms differently.
Cool, some good answers. I really like the idea of URLs too. It's an interesting area that apps fall down on right now, and this could be solved. You see things like protocol handlers and intents in Android, and so there's some opportunities there for PhoneGap. So this is a design panel, and you guys do a lot of design, and you probably do some web-like design, and everybody's really excited about CSS3, but it's actually kind of been around for a while, and it's not as big of a deal to me anymore. In fact, I'm kind of bored of hearing about it. What do you guys want to see happen in CSS4? This one I've got.
Yeah. I mean, if you've used Sass and Compass, obviously I'm a fan. That's what CSS4 should be in my mind. If you don't know, Sass and Compass are CSS preprocessors. They let you use variables and functions within your CSS. If you make the switch, and if you haven't, do it now, you can't go back. It's just way, way easier. It's a whole different level of being able to style your page or app.
Yeah. I think that CSS, I mean, I agree it does get kind of tricky. And I don't necessarily agree that we're quite there yet with CSS3 because we still have all these prefixes, right? If we were there with CSS3, then we wouldn't have prefixes and we wouldn't need things like Sass as much. But I actually would question that I think that I'm more interested in HTML6 than I am CSS4. Because HTML still doesn't do anything about context. And HTML5, to me, feels like a speed bump to MacBook Airs or something like that. Because we need to be able to address the context at the source, and then we can present it. And the simple example we have back in the day is when you had like the media types, and you could do media type handheld, projection, screen, and all that. And we still need to be able to do that, to be able to assign context to markup, so then we can potentially provide different styling rules. Like, kind of think of it as like media queries for life. Like, just like I'm here, and so what's the media query for that, right?
One more. We need, in terms of HTML6 or whatever, HTML7 has to have DPI or PPI in the browser. Like, you have to be able to know, and it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready for HTML8 now. So the mobile UX is getting pretty interesting right now. iOS obviously blazed a trail that hadn't been seen before, but I'm seeing all kinds of interesting new operating system idioms come out. New Android looks plausibly good. WebOS looks beautiful. The new MeeGo operating system is incredible. Windows Phone 7, of all places, has a wonderful design. So what are some of your favorite examples of what things are happening in mobile UX, and what can you imagine happening soon? Or what do you think is going to happen?
That's a great question. I think it's interesting, thinking specifically about some of the Windows Phone 7 stuff. Just looking at sort of the growth of design within mobile, I think there's this whole concept, that a button is a hack. It's this idea of interacting more with the content and content sort of coming to you and you messing around with it, because we've obviously got a lot of these touch and gestural sorts of interfaces. I think we're going to start to explore that a lot more, and things are going to become a lot more rich. I don't know what that's going to look like. I think it's probably going to have a lot to do with the kinds of hardware that we see coming out. I don't know what that necessarily looks like, but obviously the operating system and any of the UX is really based around, what can I do with this physical device? And yeah, I don't know beyond that.
I guess I'd like to see, more custom stuff within the apps. I think if anybody's upgraded to Lion on their Mac, obviously everybody despises the iCal app because it's got that like torn paper and everything. But I like the idea that within Lion, every app goes full screen and they have custom designs within those apps. And I could see that mentality coming to mobile, where you have apps like Flipboard, where granted it's utterly fantastic on the iPad. The only thing that resembles native controls within Flipboard is the shape of the back button. And generally, everything else is intuitive, it's plain, it's minimal. It doesn't matter what OS, that would look just as great on an Android tablet, on a Playbook. That's kind of where I hope things go, is sort of the brand, the individuality coming to the app, and the operating system less important. That being said, Windows 7 is gorgeous, sexy.
Good question and great answers. I mean, I agree. I think the hardware is definitely going to drive it. iOS is still very hardware accelerated as far as the presentation layer. I know with Mango, more things are getting hardware accelerated. So I think we can look forward to a lot more animations, which can be a bad thing. And like what David mentioned, the stitching, the skeuomorphs is what it's called. Apple's going. So skeuomorph is a visual artifact of something that doesn't need to exist. So like if you think, the example I use in my talks is the core gap that has all the little knobs. It's just a screen full of dials that you don't necessarily actually have to have a dial, and maybe that's not the most efficient way to actually have that interface, but it's a way for us to remember that this is how the core gap or core device works. But that's what Apple's going crazy with, skeuomorphs, all the stitching everywhere. I think we've seen a lot of the big UX innovations come from the platforms. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of more like significant advancements. I think what makes iOS or Windows Phone great was they completely abandoned Apple's kind of approach to like windowing and 3D and that sort of thing. So it was unique and new, and I think some of the other device makers have followed Q. What I'm looking for is for brands to start actually doing their own branding and actually start to abandon and push their own, do their own kind of look and feel, and abandon kind of the iOS way of doing things. I mean, pretty much every platform except for Windows Phone is still borrowing what Apple's kind of design cues. So I'm really looking forward to the brands and all the designers and all the other companies to really start doing some amazing things there. And I think that's where we'll see the innovation, not necessarily from the mobile space.
I just want to add to that. I think a lot of that too has to do with just the maturity of people doing the design. Obviously, as you do more and more, whether it's a mobile app or a website, you sort of work within the confines of what you understand, and once you're able to sort of break out of that, it's a little bit better. And having a comfort level if you're dealing with clients to sort of say, yeah, iPhone is really great, but it's not to say that you have to use that Chrome in order to make it awesome. So
Yeah, I love it. For the PhoneGap project, we always encourage people to design for their brand, and that's truly cross-platform. So I'm glad Joni brought up clients, because clients are fun. Who here does client work at all? Right, so how do you deal with your clients in the mobile space?
Well, there's I don't know. There's always good clients and not so good clients.
I guess I should say, I should qualify this more. How do you prepare your clients for the mobile design process?
Okay, well, I mean, it's good. I think it's the same as I would for any other process that we're looking at. Obviously, clients are coming in with some with good basis of understanding in the mobile space, and then some with very dangerous levels of little understanding. Just trying to be really open with them about what our discoveries are, what we've found with things. I tend to go through a fairly intensive process with people and just letting them in on everything that I'm doing, especially at the very beginning when there's certain decisions that they can be involved with, to make them feel as though, they've had a bit of input on the color of that button and that sort of thing. And then once they sort of feel like they can rely on me, then they're going to take some recommendations about whether or not that's going to work on mobile a little bit more to heart, because they start to understand that I'm an expert and I'm there to help them. So I don't think it's a whole lot different than the way that I've worked with clients in the past from a mobile perspective.
So I'm kind of fortunate. I'm just a company guy now. I don't do that. Reformed client guy, but I have done client work. I would say it is very similar with any other sort of design work and client work. You have to, one, try to get good clients to begin with and be able to say no to the bad ones. But then also, I guess just finding out the level of, again, coming back to like the level of customization that they want. And I wasn't being rude earlier, I was trying to get some reference apps. Do they want to be like Twitter for iPhone, where it's basically all of the default controls? Do they want to be Gowalla, where it feels native to the platform, very native, but custom colors, custom, design everywhere? Or do they want to be the Reader app or the Flipboard, where they just sort of create their own, system, and then that can go cross-platform? I think that would be the first step in sort of figuring out what they're looking for and setting expectations. But yeah, I think that's.
So our director of technology, Scott Deerdorf, he has this great quote. And because we were working on this project and we were having a hell of a time getting the client kind of along, when we were just solving hard problems, and they, we weren't feeling the love from the client. And one day he just turned around and he was just like, we could make the absolute best app in the world, but if the client doesn't know why it's good, then we failed. Like, there's no difference between the worst app in the world. And so part of our job is education and making sure we're not talking over them, which we have a tendency to do, and that we're kind of moving at their speed and not overwhelming them with all the different details that you have to consider for any mobile application. And that's where we go back to that process, and we just try to figure out, like, okay, what's the right pacing? Some clients you can go a lot faster, other clients you need to move really slow. And then I would also say, and this is something that I'm starting to realize now not everyone can do, but you also have to kick the client in the ass sometimes. And I just sent an email this morning that was just like, you're doing it all wrong. Like, your product team isn't talking to your design team. No one's talking to the developers. Like, if you don't get this shit sorted out soon, like, it's just all going to end in tears. So, yeah. So it's like, so you just have to kind of give them that, and don't be afraid to kind of fire the client, and or do things that think that you're going to get you fired. That's always a good way to kind of get things, moved along. The worst thing that's going to happen is what? They fire you, So. Maybe they weren't the right client for you in the first place.
Just want to add on real quick. Brian and I have worked together a little bit before, and I'll say I think we have the exact same methodology, the same mentality when dealing with clients. Yeah. Just to reiterate what you said, I think if you're doing client work right now, you have to know it's not about art, it's not about knowing your golden ratio, it's psychology. It's ability to keep on a schedule. It's like project management. It's therapy. It's education. It's hand-holding. It's kicking them in the ass. It's tough love. But it's all this emotional stuff that is not, sending emails. It's not coming up with a PSD. It's not programming your CSS.
Oh, I have one more thing. Yeah. I just remembered, probably the best thing that we ever did is we stopped using Basecamp. So I swear to God. So the tendency is, it works great for internal teams, but the tendency is that when you do a PSD, you pitch it over the fence, right? And so we stopped doing the pitch over the fence, and we only schedule GoToMeetings, and we do an actual visual walkthrough with the client. And even though we were showing them the same pace, the same designers, but the level of feedback and kind of hostility the client had turned around like overnight, like literally overnight. So because they heard us walk through every single detail that we considered that just can't be conveyed in an email or a Basecamp post. So that would be probably my biggest lesson is never pitch a design via email or Basecamp or anything. Always do it over the phone with them, get up early if you have to, if they're in Hong Kong or whatever it is. But walk them through your rationale because they want to hear that. That's part of the education process.
I will go just one step further. And when I used to do design agency work in Philadelphia, I would actually insist on the first comp always being face-to-face. I would go to Boston, I would visit clients in Florida, all along the Eastern Coast, some in the West, and it helps so exponentially, not just for the hand-holding, not just for them being able to see your reasoning or hear you explain things, but also so that you can actually see their body language. You can actually see if they're talking about something, but they're staring at this one little part of the screen. That part is an issue for them. You can see if they're agitated, finicky, all those things are just way better face-to-face.
Yeah, I totally agree with the face-to-face, and I always do, even at the very end of the project, if it's the last mock deliverable in the last sprint, it's always a conversation to say, this is what we're looking at, and it could be the most basic thing, and they just say that's all good, but at least they've had an opportunity to talk. The other thing I was going to mention too is that I don't think we find it so much at Nitobi because most clients are coming to us because they're looking for cross-platform, but I have talked to friends, ex-colleagues, ex-clients that really are focused specifically on iOS and only wanting to do an iOS application. And I think that's just because of a lack of knowledge or understanding that there even exist other platforms out there. So I think that that's kind of part of the, it's part of the education too. And I recently talked to a friend who's like, yeah, we're going to develop this great app and it's going to be only on the iPhone. I'm like, why would you guys do just a native iPhone app? And they just didn't really register that they could do something else. So something to inform people of.
Time to wrap it up? Okay, one more question? Or? Okay, well, I have one more that I think is interesting, so I'm not even going to give you the option. I don't know why I asked. That was really good feedback, how to treat the client. I like it. So when you guys are doing design, you have to ultimately test. And to test, to see if you're being successful, you need to measure things. And I wanted to know, what points of measurement do you put in place, and how do you test if a design is working? Be quick.
Okay, test if a design is working. I think obviously we do a lot of prototyping, both for ourselves and then putting it in front of a client. If it's working from like an uptake perspective, it's just looking at stats to see if more people are visiting and more stuff is being used. I think that's a big part of it.
I am just awful at that part. I typically bail before or complete the project before it goes into that real, sort of get 50 people in a room and test it type thing, and like record them. And I just have never gone that in depth. I've done a few. There's a great service called, I think, just usabilitytesting.com or something, where you actually just say, you give them $40 and they'll find somebody in the demographic you want, and they'll record themselves going through some flow. It's actually not that bad. That's been helpful in terms of web design, but otherwise it's like, I use it myself, I get a few other people to use it, get feedback, but it's pretty basic. And then I do A/B testing. Yeah, I get feedback, and I do a lot of A/B testing after launch, but not in that same sort of UX testing, record them type way. I probably should.
So I have to say that's such a developer question. So I mean, when you're hitting the right notes, you feel it, right? You feel it in your bones. You know that you're doing the right thing, and this goes into like what I think Gruber's been talking about with Steve Jobs. It's kind of this auteur type approach. It came out this week, but we did a bunch of work with BBC, and we went through tons of usability testing. And the final design was the same vision that we started with, right? So we had a vision, and then after all these usability studies, after all the stakeholder buy-in and all that, we kept saying, this is the right way to do it. And so we went and we got usability data to support our initial vision of what this could be. And we pushed it. Yeah, exactly. But we pushed it, it's like we pushed for the vision, right? And so we knew what was right. And so it wasn't kind of a design by committee exercise. It was really kind of trying to steer the testing to make sure that we had the right rationale to support that vision. And then if it didn't, then we questioned, is that valid? And then, what do we need to do? We did rapid iteration to say, okay, well, let's put something completely different in front of them and see how that works. And then when it failed, we were like, we knew the vision was right. So it just kind of gave us confidence to sell it.
Also, just think of coming to Steve Jobs, what you're saying, think of in Lion that they flipped the direction of the scroll on the trackpad. I mean, could you imagine having a meeting, having a UX testing session of people where the thing's reversed? That's just, sometimes you just have to have a vision, you have to stick to it.
Did you see the New York Times? The New York Times article that came out last week to talk about this? So there was last week there was an article in New York Times, and then on top is this comic, and there's a bunch of Google people that are sitting there, GOOL, and they're all like, yes, no, maybe, and they're trying to make a design decision, whereas Apple of Steve Jobs, it was just like, it's going to be this way, damn it.
Huge thing, yeah.
I've done a lot of usability testing in the past, and I will say one thing, it's valuable, it's interesting to do, but rarely is it very possible to get a really natural setting going on so that you get people actually experience something the way that they might. It's pretty much impossible, so.
Especially with devices, don't move that damn device.
Yeah, especially if the device is new and they haven't seen it.
Dun, 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 dun. Thanks, guys.